When the Roman Empire collapsed in 400 AD, it stayed dead. The roads fell into disrepair, the aqueducts stopped flowing, and literacy across Europe vanished. Italy didn't see another unified government for over 14 centuries. Deep in the rainforests of Central America, the Maya faced a similar end. By the 9th century, they abandoned their cities entirely. The civilization disappeared so completely that their descendants living in the same forests could no longer read the writing on these stones. Even modern superpowers are susceptible. In 1991, the Soviet Union evaporated in a single month. One day, 290 million people lived in a global superpower. The next, they woke up in 15 different countries, surrounded by an economy that had shrunk by 40%. This is the historical norm. When a great power finally breaks, it fractures into rubble. For most civilizations, a total systemic collapse is a terminal event. China is the outlier. In the last 2 millennia, the Chinese state has suffered at least 7 complete collapses. Each time, the capital burned and the dynasty fell, yet the civilization resurrected itself every single time, using the same written language and administrative blueprint. Today, Western analysts point to high youth unemployment and a shrinking population as signs that the country has finally reached its limit. They observe the current friction and predict a permanent decline. However, these predictions often overlook a specific 4-part civilizational architecture. This system was designed to withstand the exact type of internal and external shocks that have destroyed every other empire. Betting on a final Chinese collapse requires ignoring 22 centuries of proven institutional engineering. To see where the country is headed, we have to look at the mechanisms that allow it to reboot when others vanish. The first mechanism is the writing system. While Latin splintered into multiple dead languages after Rome fell, the Chinese script, or Hanzi, remained unchanged. Chinese characters encode meaning rather than sound. A magistrate in the north and a merchant in the south might speak 2 completely different languages, but they read the exact same document. The script floats above the spoken word. This ensures that when a dynasty falls, the state's institutional memory remains intact. A new administration can open the old archives on day 1. The tax codes, land registers, and maps are all instantly readable. By separating the script from speech, the civilization ensured that its administrative data could survive the physical destruction of its government. For 1,300 years, the state was maintained by a massive meritocratic bureaucracy recruited through the imperial exam. This system produced a class of thousands of certified officials every generation. Unlike European feudalism, which relied on the fragile bloodlines of dukes and kings, China's power was held by a standardized civil service. These men were trained to follow established protocols rather than personal loyalty to an individual ruler. Even when an emperor was assassinated or the central government was in chaos, these magistrates continued to hear legal cases and manage grain stores in their local counties. They were loyal to the administrative system itself. This created a state that could run on autopilot. The head of the government could be removed, but the body of the bureaucracy kept the country functioning until a new leader emerged. The third piece is the mandate of heaven, or Tianming. This is a psychological framework that interprets civilizational crisis not as the end of the world, but as routine maintenance. In this worldview, if a ruling family becomes corrupt or cruel, heaven withdraws its support. Famines and rebellions are seen as an eviction notice. The collapse of a dynasty is framed as a necessary step to allow a more virtuous family to take over. This concept provided an immediate framework for the next regime to claim legitimacy. Rebels weren't seen as traitors to the civilization, but as the instruments used to reset it. This provided a pre-written script for the population. Instead of waiting for an apocalypse, the culture was psychologically prepared to actively rebuild. Finally, there is the sheer demographic mass. For 2,000 years, the Chinese population has rarely dropped below 40 million people, even during its worst centuries. This creates a demographic buffer. When the Black Death killed 25 million people in Europe, it wiped out 1/3 of the continent and broke its economic systems. When the Taiping Rebellion took nearly 30 million lives in China, the country still had 350 million people left to maintain the state. This massive population historically swallowed foreign invaders. When the Mongols and the Manchus conquered the country, they were eventually absorbed by the sheer scale of the culture they were trying to rule. Operating on a scale 10 times larger than its neighbors turned regional catastrophes into mere historical footnotes. Outside observers have a history of misreading these cycles. In the 19th century, foreign powers carved up territory and labeled the country the sick man of Asia, assuming the empire was in a state of terminal decay. In 1949, as a new republic emerged from a century of war, Western intelligence reports confidently predicted the state would fail within a decade. They looked at the poverty and the rubble and saw an impossible recovery. Today, the headlines have returned to the same theme. Analysts observe current debt levels and unemployment figures and declare that the country's rise has reached its final conclusion. But history shows that betting on a terminal collapse has been a losing wager for 2,000 years. These crises are often the catalysts for the next phase of the cycle. The current economic and demographic pressures are severe, but they follow a specific historical pattern. In this worldview, severe instability precedes a reorganization of the state rather than a final end. While the outside world observes signs of decay, the underlying infrastructure is preparing for the next iteration of the state. The cycle has begun to reset. The powers that navigate the next century will be the ones that recognize this pattern. The danger lies in celebrating a decline that history suggests is temporary. The civilization has fallen 7 times, and the architecture remains intact. The dragon is not dying. It is simply preparing for its next breath.